right. So, Tim, it's whatever day it is since we've last connected, and we're moving into the next stage. I can't even remember the name of it, but like, let's go.
I think this is like day 63 on our journey to the new world.
It is.
If I were to wrap it up in terms of what that journey looks like. But so this is chapter 3, Renick. Okay. This is the optimization stage of the corporate life cycle. So if you remember, in our last video, we talked about the opportunistic stage of the corporate life cycle, and that's where the battle took place, right?
Yeah.
We were holding on for dear life.
We're holding on the rails
as the market threw everything it had at us.
No doubt.
And we had to react real time to make adjustments and stretch and pry our product and the underlying operations in ways we just never anticipated in the Bay of Cadiz.
You can't, yeah.
So now we're entering the optimization stage of our journey. And Ferdinand here is standing at the stern of the ship, if you remember.
Yeah.
And he's in tatters from the battle the night before. And he squints his eyes to make out this silhouette approaching from the east. Now, this silhouette looks, thank God, nothing like the pirate ships the night before.
Right? I was worried and concerned.
And as it draws closer, it actually looks to be about 2.5 times the size of our Grace.
Okay.
It's constructed of iron. It's got steam propulsion. And for the first time in a while, you can imagine, Ferdinand's heart is racing at the prospect of saving our Grace and its crew.
Right.
So it comes up and docks alongside our Grace, and the captain of this behemoth ship throws a line, and Ferdinand motions him to come aboard. And he's dressed in the finest naval garb, and he introduces himself as Captain Reginald, and motions briefly to introduce his first mate, Buckley. And Reginald goes on to explain that he and his crew navigate the ocean looking for ships battered by the rough seas and which need help on their journey to find the riches of the New World. And Ferdinand shares the adventures of our Grace, and Reginald and Buckley are listening intently.
Right.
In fact, Ferdinand, I would say, is probably a little surprised by the detail of their questions, particularly those questions related to how did that ship navigate the rough waters of these open seas?
Mm.
And so when Ferdinand had finished, Reginald turns to glance over the remnants, the wreck of our Grace. Mm. And he asks Ferdinand, do his ambitions to reach the world still really burn that bright? You can imagine now looking at this ship. And Ferdinand's a little despondent at this point. And he says, with the resources which remain, I don't know if I see a viable path without risking the lives of all of the remaining crew.
Right.
And it was the first time that he shared this publicly in front of the crew. Mm. And you can imagine just saying it out loud, Renick, he felt his knees buckle just as the words exited his mouth.
Yeah.
So Reginald motions to the quarterdeck and he says, Ferdinand, would you be open to speaking to Buckley and I privately? So now they're beyond earshot from the crew. And Reginald explains that beyond searching the high seas for lost vessels, they also provide financing to help these ships prepare for the next leg of their journey to the New World.
Right.
Now, after the night before, you could imagine Ferdinand is hanging on every word coming from Reginald's mouth. His excitement is growing by the second as his prospects of reaching the New World suddenly are taking a very favorable turn. And he wants nothing more than to share this news with his crew. So Ferdinand proceeds to sign the papers that Reginald pulls from his leather satchel. And he starts racing back towards his crew. And he's now got a grin brimming from ear to ear.
Right.
And so he announces to the crew of Our Grace this new partnership with Reginald and Buckley. And he explains that they're going to be towed back to Punta Delgada, which is on San Miguel Island.
Okay.
That's where they're going to rendezvous with other members of Reginald's team before quickly continuing their journey to the New World.
I feel better about the fact that this is happening, Ferdinand, too, by the way.
Rescue is in place.
Keep going.
And while they don't have time to rebuild the ship at port,
right,
they are going to pull together the plan and their crew for continuing the voyage ahead of them. So you can imagine the crew, how excited they are now about getting the well-needed resources. So incidentally, Jingo, Gabriella, and Jorge break into wine storage, and they're toasting their good fortune as the ship is getting towed back.
They're tying one on downstairs in the mate's quarters.
Give me a nice cab sack. So now once at port, Ferdinand and his team are introduced to other members of Reginald's team, and they each specialize in different systems of the seagoing vessels, right? Okay. Each of them having at one point or another been part of a very similar journey to the New World. And as they claim, they have the scars to prove it, right?
Right.
And so, well, Jingo and Gabriella and Jorge, I'd say they were somewhat impressed with the credentials of their counterparts. They also had a difficult time trying to translate their experiences to the experience of our Grace.
Sure.
But by nightfall, Ferdinand pulls them all aside and shares that he's still going to be making the journey with them, but our Grace is going to assume a new captain by the name of Lewis. And each of them would now be accountable to Lewis going forward. So Jingo, Gabriella, Jorge, they go back and they share this news with their teams. And you can imagine there's both a mix of excitement and anxiety, right? You have new leadership coming in. There's anticipation of new leadership, and that brings with it the need for them to prove themselves again to Lewis and his team, right? They already proved themselves to Ferdinand. Now they got to prove themselves to Lewis. But they also recognize it as an opportunity to jockey for better roles on the ship.
I like it.
So now Lewis, of course, no time to waste. He's got to get going. He arranges for the final supplies, all the materials needed to rebuild our Grace to be onboarded, and they quickly depart. And they're setting out once again for the New World. And as his first order of business, he appoints Hamley. Now, Hamley is a new navigator, and Hamley's responsible for working closely with Gabriella to reposition the masts and the sails.
Okay.
So Lewis has a goal of accelerating their pace to the New World. And so Hamley's responsible for rethinking nearly every aspect, from where to position the new mast to the material used to best weather the winds. Lewis has now a pretty aggressive goal for their arrival in the New World. And he says, I want to be reported on or updated on our progress every single day. Now, at first, Gabriella's all too pleased to have a thinking partner in Hamlin to rework the propulsion system. But she's also a little anxious that her role as the chief sail officer might be compromised under Lewis's leadership. Mm-hmm. And adding to the political complications, they also have very different opinions on what would work best for our Grace. So they're really now defending their opinions pretty fiercely at this point.
Wow. Okay.
Now, just as these dynamics are going on in the sailing system,
right,
there's similar dynamics that are unfolding between Jorge and Jingo and their new counterparts, Amelia and Jasper.
Wow.
So Jorge and Jingo, they're pretty frustrated. And they approach Ferdinand and they start complaining. You know, what happened to the camaraderie that we used to have in the earliest days of our Grace? It seems like it's now under threat by Reginald, Lewis, and the new crew members who would come aboard to help us get to the next leg of the journey. So this infighting grows increasingly intense, and it becomes clear that the distractions really start to put Lewis's arrival goal in the New World in jeopardy. Now, to make matters worse, Renick, each of the teams are so engulfed in their own projects that they spend very little time coordinating with the other teams. And this lack of alignment becomes immediately apparent when the hull was rebuilt with heavy iron to better protect our Grace from the rough seas.
Right.
Now, you can imagine, this is a great decision unto itself.
Sure.
But Jorge and Amelia failed to confer with Gabriella and Hamley, who were building a new sailing system designed to propel this more agile, lightweight vessel to achieve the speeds necessary to meet Lewis's arrival goal. And we saw similar issues quickly begin to reveal themselves, which really reflected this lack of cooperation across the various teams on the ship.
Right.
This all comes to a head. Lewis asked to take a tour of the new armament system, and they noticed that one of the components was constructed too close to one of the masts, really obstructing their ability to fully let out the sails. And of course, as you can imagine, meet Lewis's very aggressive timeline for getting to the new world. So at this point, you can imagine Lewis has just had enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, everyone has been working so hard to rebuild our grace, but it's always 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. Sometimes it feels like 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. Right. It's well short of where they need to be to remain on the aggressive arrival schedule.
Sure.
He summons all the officers to the deck for an emergency meeting. And in this meeting, Renick, he introduces his new addition to the officer corps of our grace, Amerigo. And with the introduction of Amerigo, our grace is poised to exit the optimization stage and enter the synchronization stage, which is what we will conclude with our next and final video.
Get out of here. I got to wait again.
You got to wait one more video. But look, let's briefly put a wrap on the optimization stage, because there's a lot going on here.
No, listen. Yeah, I don't even know where to begin, but I'll let you handle that one, because it just seems like there's so much happening.
Well, we brought in new leadership, right?
By the way, is Ferdinand still with us?
Ferdinand's still with us. He's like chief advocate, chief cheerleader.
Right, yeah.
Which is oftentimes, right? The founder may not be running the day-to-day when you bring in a new president, but they definitely are still very much involved with the company. I mean, they are the ones still with the vision and the inspiration. They're also the ones who are out there talking to press and really pushing evangelizing the mission of the organization.
Love it.
But we bring in new leadership here, right? Because every stage of the corporate life cycle brings new challenges. And I think both Ferdinand and his new investment partners recognize that while he was an incredible visionary and absolutely the right leader to get them this far, they needed a new leader for the challenges that were now before them.
Sure.
Right. And that new leader, as often happens, brings in new personnel.
Right.
Who doesn't always see eye to eye with the original crew. And so you begin to see the original crew start to question the evolving culture of our grace, which is now moving from one of what I would call inspiration and excitement, right, in the early days of an organization,
passion,
to one of more structure and accountability and discipline.
Right. Yeah, I get it. I'm with you.
And then what we also saw was everyone's really focused on fixing the ship, right? Our grace, the product. It's often in their zeal to rebuild the product, in this case, our grace, the crew starts to focus inward on the systems of the ship, right? Just like we focus inward, sales, marketing, customer success, which is all well and good, but it's this inside out view that has consequences. Right. And so we start to see silos begin to form, and we really start to lose focus with what really matters. And that's the customer. Right. And of course, the customer is represented by the demands of the oceans and its interplay with our grace.
I love it, man. I love it. I'm excited. I'm interested to hear how Marigold is going to do whatever he's going to do. It's a big question mark for me.
So join us for the final video. It's going to be chapter 4, synchronization. And here we'll find out if our grace can overcome these obstacles and ultimately find their way to the treasures of the new world.
I can't wait. Can't wait.